welcome Milan Rai.
Thanks.
Actually, we'd like to start immediately the conversation, actually, and we've all been reading your book, 7/7, the London bombings, Islam and the Iraq War. My first question was, reading your book, I was wondering, actually, if we can treat 7/7 as history already.
Well, I think that we're asked to learn from history, so I think we have a duty to learn from what happened a year ago. So in that sense, even though what happened on the 7th of July is very much a present issue, and as we found out on the 21st of July, it was not by any means a one-off event. It's both now something that has happened in the past, and it's something that we need to learn from. And it's also a warning about the future, a warning which has been delivered by two of the bombers in their video statements. And I think that particularly right now, I think that it's very important for us to attend to the likely causes of the attacks that took place, because if we want to prevent them from happening again, we have to understand why they happened. Otherwise, we're not going to take the correct actions. And Marina Warner was just making a reference to the war in Lebanon and the anger that there is over that and outrage. And I think I have a slightly different perspective on it. I think that I see a lot of anger and outrage about what's going on there, because it seems like an exercise of unrestrained brutality, disproportionate brutality, illegality. And for us here in London, who are here in London right now, the biggest threat to our security here in this city is our Prime Minister's support for what Israel is doing in Lebanon right now. And that's really kind of the heart of what I was trying to write about, because immediately after the 7th of July attacks, we found out a few things pretty rapidly. One of them was in the opinion polls in the Daily Mirror and in the Guardian, where we found out that in the Daily Mirror it was 85%, in the Guardian it was 64% of people in Britain felt there was a causal connection between the war in Iraq and the bombings that took place in this city. And then there was a later poll for the GLA, which found only 8% of people didn't think that there was a connection. So there's very nearly a consensus in this city about that. And it was to investigate that topic, which we found out a lot of evidence about. That's one of the main reasons why I wanted to write the book.
And can you tell us about your arrest outside Downing Street last year?
Sure.
And larger issue, the whole issue of civil disobedience, which is a term that we haven't kind of heard this entire day.
Okay.
And even the term activism.
Right, activism, civil disobedience, and how I got arrested on the 25th of October 2005. Three-part question. I think when people use the word activism, I think what they mainly mean is people who are trying to struggle against established power, people who are using grassroots mobilization, people who are using face-to-face work in their communities, kind of horizontal networks to try to counteract the power of the state, counteract the power of corporations when they are doing wrong things. Civil disobedience is one of the modes of doing that. It also can be used to strengthen the power of the state or strengthen the power of corporations, or for objectives which I would think are against human rights and so on. So civil disobedience as such is just about taking forms of action and forms of protest which risk being arrested, being prosecuted, and being tried and punished by the criminal justice system, not necessarily illegal. So, for example, on the 25th of October last year, along with Maya Evans, I was reading out the names of people who had died in Iraq as a result of the invasion and occupation of Iraq, and Maya became the first person to be convicted of participating in an unlawful demonstration in the vicinity of Parliament under the new Serious Organised Crime and Police Act, and I became the first person to be convicted of organising an unauthorised demonstration in the vicinity of Parliament. I was convicted of organising the two-person demonstration of me and Maya. And so what we were doing was we were trying to hold a remembrance ceremony to mark the anniversary of the report in the Lancet medical journal, the estimate that 100,000 Iraqis had died. So I was reading the names of Iraqi civilians who had died. Maya was reading the names of British soldiers who had died in Iraq as a result of the invasion and occupation. And we were told when we notified the police that we wanted to go outside Downing Street to read these names, because that seemed to us a very fitting place to do it, that there were new regulations and that we would have to apply in writing for permission to do this. And initially, I was really focused on doing this remembrance ceremony. It was very important to me. But the more I thought about it, I thought, I can't cooperate with this law. I can't believe that you have to ask the police to remember the dead. I can't believe that that is something which is criminally wrong. And so in the end, I was arrested, I was convicted, and I was fined, and now the bailiffs are after me for £500 worth of goods and to seize from my property. And I'm not going to cooperate with them, so probably it'll end up with me going to prison. But that whole process, in my view, does not involve me in any illegality, because I believe that the law that was passed by Parliament is in contravention of the European Convention on Human Rights in relation to freedom of expression and assembly and so on. So I think the law is wrong, and what I have done is not illegal. It's civil obedience, which has, unfortunately in this instance, ended up with prosecution and so on.
Are you going to take this to the European...
Well, the first instance is you appeal to, I think it's a divisional court, but anyway, there is an appeal in train about that, yes.
Another question about London. I wanted to ask you the same question I've asked Marina. How has London changed, and how you think it will change in the next decades?
Well, I heard a bit of her answer to that. And I think London has changed in a lot of the ways that the world has changed. And I think that London is a globalized city. It's very much connected to what is happening in the world. And so, in a sense, the evolution of London and the fate of London are very much tied up with what's going to happen with the world. And in particular, as I was saying earlier, the basic question facing us, you know, people who work and live in London or who come here for other reasons, is, are we going to be physically secure? Are we going to live or be allowed to live in London? And I think that is the root question. And if we continue to have policies by the United States and Britain abroad in the world which continue to brutalize people around the world, giving them no hope of redress, then I think we're going to have an increasingly dangerous time here in London. And that worries me greatly. And I think that, you know, I would guess that there are some people in this room who are anti-war, who are against what's, you know, against the invasion and occupation of Iraq and so on, and maybe there are some people who are for those things, but I think that an honest inquiry into what happened in the 7th of July, an honest inquiry into Al-Qaeda and the Bin Laden phenomenon leads to the conclusion of Michael Scheuer, who used to run the Bin Laden unit for the CIA until 1996, where he says, they are not attacking us because of our values and our freedom. They are attacking us because of our policies, particularly in the Middle East. And he's the CIA's Bin Laden expert, and I think that we have to attend to that, and that means if we want to be safer, we have to change those policies.
Another question, you've written a book on Chomsky, called Chomsky's Politics, in 1995. You've also contributed to the...
Yeah, it wasn't the most poetic title, but it was descriptive.
And you've also contributed to the Cambridge Chomsky Companions. I was wondering if Chomsky, as a public intellectual, for you is a kind of a role model?
Well, you know, Chomsky is a major figure in the history of ideas for his contributions in cognitive psychology and linguistics. And he also works harder than pretty much any other commentator on contemporary affairs. So anyone who treated Chomsky as a role model would be setting themselves up for very high hurdles. I think that some of the ways in which Chomsky is exemplary, I think, are that Chomsky does take very seriously what the available evidence is. And he eschews rhetoric, and he sticks very much to trying to summarize the available best knowledge about situations. That leads to radical conclusions, it turns out. Another way in which he's exemplary is that I think he's very honest, particularly about his own shortcomings, and I think that that's a very good role model to take.
I want to kind of read you a quotation from your book, and it's really a citation, and of all people, it's a citation of David Miliband, and therefore I assume up-and-coming labor intellect, and so I assume it's with the necessary irony that you quote him. But at the 2005 Labour Party conference, Miliband said the government needed to act to prevent voters turning to extremism. Pointing to recent BNP successes in council elections in Burnley, Lancashire, he said, "It's when people feel powerless, when they feel the system doesn't work for them, they don't just get apathetic, they get angry. When they turn to anger, they turn to extremism." Miliband declared that to stay in power, we have to release power. We know that the new enemy is a sense of powerlessness. And then he added, "I think the sense of powerlessness is a very, very profound thing to us to come to terms with." And this is a little bit of a kind of obvious point for a politician. Over the next 10 years, the issue of power is going to be the core of politics. Now, what I think is untrue in this statement is that many people and many of us have perhaps turned into apathetic people, but few of us have turned into angry people. Or at least people who are able to find a way to articulate that anger that is productive. Do you have an explanation for that?
Well, you're absolutely right. You know, I was thinking that maybe you guys staying up for 24 hours is a bit of the working harder than Chomsky kind of thing. I don't know. Anyway, you're absolutely right. That quotation from David Miliband, who, as you say, is an up-and-coming Labour intellectual, he talks about the Labour Party, the Labour government releasing power, saying powerlessness is the enemy, when this government has increased the sense of powerlessness amongst people, most dramatically in relation to the war in Iraq, but in so many ways, from local government all the way up to international affairs, this government has been driven by the desire to centralize power and to increase powerlessness, and people react to that in different ways, and you're right about that. Some people react with anger, some people react with defeatism, and some people react to that by committing themselves to non-violence, and some people react to that by committing themselves to violent actions and revenge. And so I think the last bit of your question is, why is it some people choose productive uses for their anger?
No, why so few of us?
Oh, why so few?
Because
okay.
and particularly in the kind of in the groups or those parts of the population whose anger might actually be read or registered.
Well, I think that this issue of powerlessness is not just about government policy. In a way, we live in a culture of powerlessness, because in this culture, the most valued things are to be famous, to be wealthy, to be powerful. These are things which are valued. And the message we get from every corner of the culture really is, there's about a dozen people who count you know, like Bush, Blair, Bono, you know, there's a handful of people who count. What they say counts. The rest of us are just insects who can watch, and maybe we can vote for one or go and see another one in a film or buy a record from someone. We can applaud. But basically our role is to spectate, and that's the message we're being given all the time from every direction. You know, there's all this stuff about how come all of our children are so unhappy and stuff like that. We have a multi-billion pound industry which is telling all of us, including targeted at children, that we are ugly, that we're unattractive, that we're not popular enough. We've got a multi-pound industry which is there to make us feel bad and to make us feel that we're powerless and that we have to go to someone else in order to plug into what makes us worthwhile and so on. So it's not just about policy, it's all the way through. And I think even in our forms of education and so on, there's a message. There's a kind of what's being called a tacit curriculum, which is the tacit curriculum is you have to learn to shut up and listen to other people for a long time without saying anything, without being disruptive and so on. And so it's all through the culture. So it's not surprising that the end result of that is that we have internalized our own oppression there. And so there are lots of factors there. But one of the things is that the powers that be give a sense of invulnerability and immovability. And I'd just like to finish by saying one thing, which is one crucial event of my lifetime in this country was the miners' strike, which very much gave that signal. And we only found out years later that in the closing months of the strike, when everyone had given up, the Thatcher government was on the brink of defeat. But we didn't know that. She looked like she was unassailable, but in fact they were crumbling and they were very nearly defeated, and it could have turned out totally differently. But the end result of that strike, the projection that we were given, was that it was an enormous blow to the confidence of people in the trade union movement, enormous blow to people in all sorts of popular movements.
It's almost a great final statement, but however, I have a very last question. What is your unrealized project?
Unrealized?
Yes.
My filing system.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Milan Rai.